Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. I'm your host, Paul O'Neid, and as always, our podcast is brought to you by Coach's Corner University. You can use code podcast300 to save $300 off lifetime access to the platform. That means $50 for almost 200 hours of continuing education lectures and special discounts on our courses. Oh, excuse me. Our podcast is also sponsored by TC Nutrition, Barefoot Shoes, and Bacon and Barbells. You can find links to those promo codes in the description below. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined again by the co-founder of Coach's Corner University, my great friend, Tony Montgomery. Tony, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, man. Glad to see you not in a hospital bed this time.
That's true. Our last one was in the hospital bed. I look back at those clips and I'm like, man, it's weird. It's a weird, cause I was like laid down. So that it was like, you see my double chin and stuff cause I was getting fat.
Yeah, it's not a good look. It's not a good look.
It's not a good look.
You persevered, that's all that matters.
Yeah. And now I'm skinny again. How much do you weigh right now?
I don't know. I don't really check my weight anymore, but if I had to guess, probably like 210, 208.
Okay. I've been dieting pretty hard into the holidays because now that I'm not healing anymore, I figured it was a good time. I'm down to 222 this morning.
Nice. What was your heavy? Well, why would you diet into the holiday? That sounds just so.
Because we're going to the Caribbean.
Oh, so that's your holiday?
Yeah, our holidays. Yeah, we're going to Puerto Rico. The same week we got married, we're going to Puerto Rico.
Okay, that's right. You guys are pagan, so you don't really believe in holidays and stuff like that. Just more hedonic exploration. I appreciate that about you.
Yeah, me and hedonism like this. So I wanted to have you on the podcast. The last time we were on, we talked a lot about your research and the psychology of doing hard things. And we talked about neuroscience. We talked about how pursuing difficult challenges can impact our lives in a positive way. I want to dovetail off of that conversation into number one, talking about what your podcast is going to be about. You recently launched a podcast talking primarily about psychology, and then how we can, as coaches, apply the research of psychology, of challenging experiences to impact performance, impact positive outcomes, and ultimately help people live better lives.
Yeah, no, this sounds great, man. Looking forward to the conversation. And
so let's start a little bit on like what spurred you to start the podcast, right? You've been doing research, you're in your PhD, like why start a podcast now?
Yeah, so it really came down to a couple of things. One, you know me, I have a lot to say, and I just don't really feel too enthused about the way that people put stuff out there, information like through social media and those outlets. It's just not something that really intrigues me. The idea of trying to keep up with algorithms and create and generate content is not my strong suit, which is probably why it doesn't appeal to me. So I figured, one, doing a podcast will allow me to get some of my thoughts out there in a productive and coherent manner. Two, it's also going to force me to make better use of my free time. The whole idea that PhDs are supposed to be these overly demanding endeavors hasn't necessarily been the case in my pursuit. So, one, trying to just do a little bit more, put a little bit more on my plate, see what I can handle and accomplish, and see what it can push me to do. So, trying to get out of my comfort zone of talking to people that are experts in fields that I'm not necessarily an expert in, which is going to force me to do a lot of research, which is going to pretty much put me on like point of, hey, when your free time's available, like you should be doing things that are a little bit more invigorating as opposed to watching TV or trying to pass the time. So that was the other thing. And then, yeah, I'm just really curious about learning more about human nature through the research and lived experiences of people that have gone through a lot of challenging things in their life and have overcome it. So more like the anecdotal side as well. One of the people that I'm going to be interviewing is one of my best friends from kindergarten who just retired after 20 years of serving in special forces, 7 combat tours, and now just finished up his master's degree in clinical psychology. So that lived experience of human nature, leadership principles, good versus evil, I think that'll be something fascinating to delve into. And then on the research side, talking to people that are experts on the neuroscience, the psychology, consciousness, theory of mind, origins of life, stuff like that, that all go into human nature and what it means to be human, how we interact with humans, how humans behave. So that whole concept, and then also, integrating the ideas that I'm already pretty comfortable and familiar with exercise, nutrition, and the roles that those can play, and just the value behind learning as much as possible within the scientific realm of that stuff too. So just a kind of melding pot of just sparking curious thought and curious ideas and trying to find people that can answer those questions.
I find one of the best ways to learn for myself at least is just by having conversations with people and having them pick apart my ideas. That was one of my favorite parts about, you and I doing the podcast together is we could bounce ideas off one another and be like, yeah, that's probably not a good idea, or hey, that's a great idea. Maybe you should
Yeah.
pursue it further. And when you're speaking to somebody who has a different point of view or maybe a more nuanced point of view, it can expose parts of your thought process that you otherwise wouldn't have dove down. And I think it's important to highlight here. One of the things that I've always said is your base of knowledge in like exercise physiology and nutrition, it's great and it allows you to help people in certain ways. But at the end of the day, coaching is a people business. We're dealing with people who have pasts, who have experiences, who have epigenetic profiles. All of these things play into the decisions that they make and the outcomes that they get. So if we as coaches are not pursuing a greater understanding of human beings, we're going to be ultimately shortchanging the results that we can get for people. And that's why I find your work so fascinating, because it's an area where I think coaches, I don't want to say ignore, but I think they leave it as a blind spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean that's just the product of the environment that they're taught in, right? Like exercise science, there's no real psychology courses, there's no real communication courses, there's no leadership courses. It's all basic fundamentals of machine interaction. You do this stimulus, you get this adaptation. Even within the research, you'll notice that people that do research heavy in exercise, they tend to neglect the psychological component of it, even though they know that the mind body connection is a valuable tool, but they tend to shy away from that because it is not their area of expertise. And believe it or not, people that have a PhD aren't necessarily the most motivated to learn outside of their box and outside of their circle. So they tend to stick with what they know and what can get them tenured. So they kind of go down that rabbit hole of not necessarily putting those pieces together. And it's also one of those things where, although me and you value this idea of challenging our beliefs and our normative values and stuff like that we talk about, not a lot of people are comfortable with that. A lot of people want you to agree with them more so than give your point of view. And I've noticed that a lot when people ask me questions. It's really trying to discern between, do you want me to just acknowledge what you're saying as a rhetorical question, or do you actually want my opinion on it? And I would say most of the time, people just want you to acknowledge it as a rhetorical question and just agree with them. And it's not necessarily the most invigorating conversations, but it is the subset of what most people enjoy about conversations, is that like-mindedness, that bias building and belief systems that they don't necessarily want to be challenged. And I feel like that's because they have a very narrow view of their belief systems and a very superficial understanding of the things that they're espousing. Because if they had a better understanding, then you'd want that to be challenged as much as possible, because it'll only strengthen your ability to defend that position or give you new insights to learn from, to elaborate on that position. But I just feel like people are negatively opposed to that.
Well, I think being stuck in echo chambers is a byproduct of, I feel like the narrative right now, and I, I'm, I feel like people are quick to demonize certain things. There are so many positive aspects of social media and the proliferation of information and even the advent of artificial intelligence. But I feel like a lot of the conversations that we're seeing in public circles are centered around who is right
Hmm.
rather than seeking the truth. And I think that delineation for me helps when I frame conversations and I frame my own education, and I even frame the discussions that I have with other people. I mean, you and I have spoken about this all the time. Sometimes you're having a conversation with somebody and you kind of revert to the fact that, like, this isn't going to be a productive conversation. I just going to have to get through it and move on,
Yeah.
because we can have conversations without being emotional about it, without being tied to any sort of, preconceived notions. We both have beliefs as to what we feel is effective or optimal, but at the end of the day, that might not be the same for each person. So we have to have a flexible approach, and the more broad our knowledge base is, the better we're going to be able to move forward. So I really love that you are going to go down the path of exploring human behavior, exploring how you can apply that within day-to-day life. The question I would have in return to that is, as you expand your knowledge base within the field of psychology, within the field of neuroscience, you're still coaching people. Have you found that your coaching practice has changed as you've expanded your knowledge?
Yeah, definitely has. Even though my coaching business has gotten smaller, um, it's definitely one of those things where you become more empathic towards people. You try to get a better understanding of what their actual goals are versus what their stated goals are, right? Because everyone has these goals, these generative drives that they're trying to go towards. Um, but a lot of times internally, they don't really match the external verbiage that they're using, right? So it's just kind of getting a better understanding of like what's really important in this person's life and trying to figure out why that's important to them, and then helping link that back to their pursuit of what they're doing to help them build consistency, to help them build this idea of having fun while they're doing the things that they value, and finding out why they value it and what it really means to them, because that way they can have a better understanding of if it's in their value system at an extreme level, then extreme effort is going to be required to get to that. But if it's kind of like medium to moderate, then these are some things that we can do to still bring out other aspects of your life, but not necessarily go down such an extreme rabbit hole of this is the most important thing for you. So it's definitely helped with that understanding of what the person really wants out of their coaching, out of their training, and then also what's important to them. Whereas in previous, it was very much the idea of like, you hired a coach, so therefore we're going to do best practices to get to your goal, and I'm just going to take your goal at self value and not really elaborate on that more, right? And then what would happen is when they weren't able to meet their goals, we didn't really have the conversations going into that to be able to moderate those conversations better, right? So if they didn't meet their goals, it was really fundamental of like, well, maybe we should change the volume, maybe we should dial in the nutrition, maybe if we got more consistent. And now it comes down to better acceptance of not reaching those goals, of the idea of like, hey, remember when we had that conversation 2 weeks ago that you've been inconsistent on the weekend because you value social interaction a little bit more, and that creates a lot more happiness and joy in your life, and that maybe the thing on the platform isn't as important, so therefore we have to lower our expectations of what the platform is going to look like for us, as opposed to previous years where you put that as the most valuable thing, right? So that allows for better conversations to be had, and better expectations, more accurate expectations, so that they don't really get disappointed nearly as much as when they used to, because it came to the point where a lot of them had a hard time reconciling with why they haven't reached the goals that they set out for themselves, where now they have a better conceptual understanding of that due to the interactions that we're having.
Yeah, it sounds like coaching has become a lot more of a collaborative process for you,
Yeah.
working with
Yeah.
that person. And it's something that I try to have conversations with young coaches about, in terms of coaching being a relationship versus a dictatorship. And
Hmm.
being a leader is more than just telling people what to do, right? Whenever I look at training, I've always looked at training and nutrition kind of as this input output equation. And we, on the training side, we have intensity, we have volume, we have frequency, we have exercise selection, we have all these variables that go into it. But then if we go one layer deeper and attach that person's lived experience and their behavioral tendencies to that, well, our exercise selection is going to be impacted by what they enjoy doing. Their motivation in those movements is going to impact how much volume and intensity they can tolerate. And so, this, once you get down to that next layer, you realize, to be fair, that first layer, kind of meaningless. Like, yeah, it's going to lead to the outputs to some degree, but if you can't get that person on the same page, you're fighting an uphill battle, and you will get results for them for sure, because we know that mechanistic studies will show, if you do this, you get this stimulus leads to this adaptation. But if you actually harness that person's motivations, their behavioral tendency, their buy-in, well, now all you're doing is turning up the knob of volume and intensity and intent for those inputs to get even better outputs. Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah. And I mean, and the idea is to let them come to those understandings themselves, right? Like, even
Yeah,
with the questions that you can ask, can kind of lead the way. What I found within the research, especially when we're doing like subjective questionnaires, is that you'll get a lot of people who give you answers that they think are the correct answers as opposed to how they truly feel.
good
Especially when you're
point.
doing like mood statements and RPEs, even perceived effort, all those things. If you tell them we're doing failure exercise, then they're going to give you, depending on their personality, they're going to give you the answer that you think is the right answer, even though you can visually see that that doesn't necessarily correlate to what they're giving you, right? So making sure that you can kind of lead them, guide them down the path to get the true answers to the questions, as opposed to them feeling the need to give you those answers. So you have to really set it up to where they feel very comfortable talking to you about those things. And it's up to you to be a better listener than a talker, which can be very difficult over email communication. But you have to be attuned to certain verbiage, certain ways, certain framing, certain consistency within each email that they send you, of like, why did they use that word? What do they mean by this, right? As opposed to just kind of reading it and going to the next person. That's why when you have a huge variety of clientele and a large number, I don't necessarily think that that information is as valuable to that coach, because they're just kind of going through the process of, I have 50 clients that need to check in today. I'm just going to get down to the X's and O's.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, too, I want like each prep, I want them to look back on it and not necessarily appreciate the total, but enjoy the experience as a whole. Like, did you have fun working with me? Did you find it valuable? Did you learn something about yourself that you can take into not only lifting, but to your life? Like, are you better able to cope with stress? Are you better able to deal with the adversities in life? Are you a happier person? Like, those are the things fundamentally that mean more to me than the total on the platform. And when you think about it, when those things are in line, then the total is usually in line with that as well. The happier the person is, the better they're going to lift. Like you were just saying, the more intrinsic motivation they're going to have to go to the gym, because they're a happier person outside of the gym as well.
You mentioned the communication medium, and it was funny. I was talking to Austin a while ago, Austin Stout, and he was saying, like, he gets people all the time like, "Hey, coach, feeling great today. I'm not stressed at all. Things are moving well." And the email was sent at 2:13 a.m.
Right.
So it's like I don't know. I think we need to read into this a bit more. Um, but do you find that you've changed the communication mediums of your coaching, or are you still doing it primarily through email or WhatsApp or whatever platform that you're using?
Yeah, still doing it through email, but just being a little bit more detailed with the questions, and just getting the check-ins to be a little bit more thorough, and a little bit more down the empathic psychological side as well. But yeah, and then like I said, just the more you read into it, the better it is, right? Like, so if you prompt people with questions, then they're going to give you answers. But if you don't prompt them, then the first thing they tell you is usually the thing that's the most important on their mind, right? So with that email that Austin received, the fact that they felt that in the first sentence they need to tell them how unstressed they were, is probably indicative of probably how much stress they're under, right? Because like why would that be so salient on their mind to express this need? Because they're probably saying in their mind, well, if I tell the coach that I'm not stressed, then that means either we're going to improve the volume. Maybe we'll increase the training volume. Maybe I'll get a cheat meal. Maybe he'll tell me, awesome, we can keep pushing. Like there's so many things in their mind that are going to create the answers that they want to receive the outcome that they want. And for a coach, we have to understand that, that's just the human nature part of it. They're trying to answer questions to get the outcomes that they want as well, based on how they feel. And if we know somebody's prepping, if we know somebody's getting ready for a competition, nerves, anxiety, how they feel progress is coming, all that's going to dictate how they see themselves externally and internally, which is going to infer into the answers that they give you.
It's interesting that you say that because, like, as coaches, we're looking at, okay, what are the outputs of the inputs I'm providing this person? But if they're only giving you the outputs that they want so that you'll give the inputs that they actually are seeking, right? Like it's almost like manipulating the check-in on the part of the client so that they can get what they want out of it, as opposed to actually giving you the information that is helpful and accurate. And I think, thinking back, like there's been a lot of instances with clients who will absolutely do that. And it's based on personality. Like if that
Mm-hmm.
person really wants to push hard, like I know for myself, thinking back to my bodybuilding prep, there were a lot of things that were going wrong, and I never told my coach, even though I know that I would want to know that from my own clients, because I didn't want to be perceived as weak, or I didn't want to be perceived as not working hard enough. But I know that if I gave my coach that information, he probably could help me avoid some of the pitfalls that I ultimately ran into.
Yeah. And I've seen that within my own research, right? There's people that are more type A personality driven, where no matter what, they want to be that straight A student, right? So when they come in and they do failure tasks, their mood's usually really good. They're, so the questionnaires that I'm using right now are the PANAS, which is positive affect, negative affect, PALMS, profile mood states, the Beck depression inventory, and then I'm also using the BREC, which is a behavioral regulation exercise questionnaire, right? And based on their personalities, you can kind of stereotype the answers that they're going to give you. But then also knowing that that person has that personality structure, um, we have to blind everyone to like the outcomes of what they're trying to do, where all they see is like power output. Because if they saw how far they went last time or how many reps they got last time, those people would always come in and be like, how many reps did I get last time? Because I want to beat it this time. And it's like, that's not the point of the research, right? And then those people always ask you afterwards, like, how was my score? Was I better than everyone else? Did I give you the right answers, right? So those are the personalities that, like, no matter what, no matter how they're feeling, they're going to tell you they're feeling great, and they're going to perform to redline no matter what, because they want that acceptance, and that's also in their behavior of being that like straight A perfect person, right? Whereas other people who have a little bit more of a laid back temperament, um, they're probably going to be a little bit more accurate with what they tell you, but they're also going to be more affected by how they feel. Whereas if they feel bad, they're probably not going to put as much effort into it. Whereas that type A personality, no matter how they felt, you're going to get everything they had that day, right? So understanding those dynamics would help you better articulate like RP percentages, training variables, how much volume that person can handle, whether or not they're giving you honest feedback, where they tend to lean towards more so, if they're going to lean towards undershooting versus overshooting. Right? Those are all things that you can kind of figure out through getting to know them through their personalities, and just continuing to build those categories of what you see each individual.
Well, you mentioned like you can't do that when you have a high number of clients. And I actually recorded a video yesterday imploring potential clients to start asking their potential coaches how many clients that coach works with.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think if we normalize smaller client rosters and more intimate communications, results are going to go up. Like there's very few people I know that can handle more than 50, 55. Like if coaching is full time and that's all you're doing, managing that many more relationships is going to be next to impossible. Like, what's that number? That's like the number of meaningful relationships you can have in your life.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I forget what it is, but it's really small. So when you hear
Yeah,
about coaches, when you hear about coaches, oh, I have 150 clients. All you're doing is math. All you're doing is input output equations. You cannot help every single person be the best version of themselves other than here's your paper, go do the thing. You
yeah.
can't.
And you see that too because they use the same exercises, they usually have the same injuries, right? It's like, oh, this person hurt their back again, I wonder who their coach is. Oh yeah, it's the same coach that, these three other people injured their back, and they do the same exercises, they have the same volume. um, so yeah, I mean, you see that, and that's just something that you have to figure out if that's important to you, right? Because some people want to be a part of that team, and say that that coach is their coach, and that means more to them than personalized training. And sometimes that could give them more intrinsic motivation to be the pupil, the star pupil of that coach, because that coach has built such a reputation, and they don't want to let that coach down. So even though the coach may not be a great coach, they may have success in spite of themselves just because of the reputation that they've built, and trying to their clients trying to live up to that brand, that standard. So that's something that we see within every profession, right? Where not necessarily the best strength coach is going to be the ones in the NFL. They're the ones that have the best reputation, the best network system, and the players are good no matter what. It's like a Ferrari is going to be a Ferrari no matter what you do. You know?
I just see so many opportunities for that to go the other direction, though. I see so many opportunities for that to just push people to points where they don't need to be pushed, to run into the pitfalls that we see so often with regards to like too much drug use,
Mhm.
digestive issues, hormonal dysfunction. And to be fair, most of the clients that are coming to me now are coming to me from coaches who completely missed the boat on what I would consider very low hanging fruit in building a relationship and guiding people.
Yeah, but because of social media, the outlet that we receive information of, you're never going to see those things. Like, we don't post the failures that we had as coaches. Like, oh, look, this person signed up for me to work with me, and it only lasted 2 months, and they tore their tricep, and like, you're not going
Probably
to
not the
post.
best testimonial.
Right. It's not, it's not a great testimonial, but there's a lot of truth to that for every coach. Every coach misses the box, like, because that's just human. That's just what we do as human. Like, we're not perfect. But I think the intent is the most important thing as a coach. If you can say your intent is to do the best for your athletes as opposed to do the best for your bank account, then, that's all you can do as a coach. Right. So that's the thing that you have to battle with internally, is like, what can you control? What's important to you? What's your value system? And let the chips fall where they do, because you can't really worry too much about what other coaches are doing.
Let's shift the conversation back a little bit to a similar subject matter we talked about on our first podcast, which is like the psychology of doing hard things and the neuroscience around doing hard things and how that can lead to different perceptions on life. One of the things that I found most impactful to me about competing in a bodybuilding show was how absolutely hard it was throughout the entire process. And I felt like showcasing that resilience within that process carried over fucking 10x to the rest of my life, and the ability that I had to persevere with the challenges that I persevered through. How are you using this sort of research and knowledge within your own coaching practice, or how would you advise others implement this sort of thing within their coaching practice to really build better human beings?
Yeah, so it's a complicated question, but a good one, nonetheless, right? The idea is like, besides like building resiliency, because when you do hard things, you have to understand, like, they do come at a cost, right? So yeah, you may be able to go through a bodybuilding show and get all these benefits of like doing hard things, but you may come out of it with an eating disorder as well, right? So you have to understand, like, what the person's trying to get out of the exercise to know what's the best exercise for them, right? So a lot of my research and the stuff that I'm doing now is looking at emotion regulation, and how can we use exercise to promote emotion regulation, right? So understanding, like, we have emotions, which are these physiological states that our body creates based off of what we sense, right? So we have sense response that's been around since the single cell organisms, right? And as we evolved into multicellular organisms and evolved into having a nervous system, that sense response mechanism has always been there. It's at the forefront of nervous system evolution, right? So we have these physiological responses to the things that we perceive in life, the senses that we manifest. And then we have these feeling states of what these emotions bring about. So what my research is looking at is, like, how can we use exercise to help people regulate those emotions better? So maybe not so much the stress resiliency part, but how can we create more regulated human beings, which can, evolve into stress resiliency, right? And we can do that without necessarily doing like really, really hard things. Are there benefits to doing hard things? Yeah, but that's something you also have to build into, right? So we don't necessarily have to start people off in that realm of things, right? With emotion, you have this inverted U shape, right? So exercise at too low of intensity doesn't really do much for emotion regulation process, and because you're not getting that visceral response, those adaptations, you're not getting those endorphin releases, you're not getting the neuroplasticity, the neurotrophic factors, and all that stuff. But as you get more into that moderate intensity, that's when you start to see a lot of really positive benefits in terms of emotion regulation and your ability to reappraise negative experiences, your ability to use behavior suppression, which can be a good thing in some instances, but it can also be a bad thing in some instances, right? This inhibition of, if you're a doctor and you see a very adverse surgery going on, if you make this face like, holy shit, like, what am I looking at? This is the scariest thing I've ever done. Probably not going to put a lot of confidence into the people you're working with, right? So being able to inhibit that visceral response can be a net positive, right? But also understanding that, like, that moderate intensity between 20 to 40 minutes seems to be the sweet spot for emotion regulation. Anything less doesn't really have good consequences or good adaptations, and anything more can start to build negative consequences. But the interesting thing that they're finding within the research is that, like, the more trained you are, the more you need those higher intensities, the more you benefit from them, I guess would be the better way of putting it. Not that you need it, right? So you're able to find more positive emotions, find a more positive valence towards exercise when it is harder, because you have that aerobic base, you have that muscle base already there, right? So you've already built the value system of exercise is good for me. Now you're probably at that point where it's like, well, how much can I push and what can I get out of it, right? So that means you're probably training for something, whereas opposed to just trying to train to be fit and healthy, right? So if you're just trying to be fit and healthy, kind of that moderate intensity exercise seems to be where that sweet spot is for you to um, create a lot of positive stress responses to exercise. And then if you go beyond that, you start to get negative ones, which can create a negative valence towards exercise, which can make people not want to exercise, right? So the most important thing as a coach is, like, how can we get our people to be consistent and enjoy what they're doing? And a great way to start would be with that moderate zone of training intensity, both resistance and aerobic, right? So that'll allow them to create, right, with emotion regulation. You have the perception phase, which is, the initial, I see this happening, I see a snake, therefore my sympathetic arousal system goes through the roof, right? And then you have the valuation phase of, like, this is what I see, this is how I feel, so then this is what I'm trying to evaluate of my next move. And then you have the action phase, which is like, this is what I'm going to do, right? And what the research has shown with aerobic exercise specifically is that by training in those moderate intensities, you start to create better white fiber tracks from the prefrontal cortex, which is the area for decision making, to the amygdala, which is the fear response, right? So people that don't have that connection, for instance, babies who are born in a high stress state, right? In utero, they have their parents are say low socioeconomic status, just trying to put food on the table. They're in a high stress situation. We've seen within the research that those babies come out with bigger amygdalas, smaller prefrontal cortexes that exasperate over time because that gray matter, that white matter track isn't necessarily as fused and formed and as thick, right? So then we have higher stress response, fear responses, but we don't have the prefrontal cortex to make the right decisions, which is why we see a lot of times people with violent criminal offenses have enlarged amygdala, small prefrontal cortex. And a lot of that is due to the environment they were born into, right? So exercise is allowing us to facilitate growth in the prefrontal cortex, better connection from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala, so that fear response isn't as exasperated. We can control that fear response better and make the right decisions. And that's been done with aerobic exercise.
So as you were talking through that, I immediately went to, okay, so we're really trying to impact that valuation phase. We're
Yeah.
really trying to, like, because you see something that's scary, you're going to have that initial response. You're going to have that initial. What was the first phase?
Oh, the perception phase.
Perception. So that perception is going to be there no matter what. But
Mm-hmm.
if you did have a bigger amygdala, that could be amplified.
Right.
So you might need a more robust valuation phase, so those neural connections, which we can build through exercise, because ultimately we want to control for behavior. So through the relationship with the client, you're kind of understanding what their typical perception phase is going to look like. And then you can almost pepper in as much like moderate intensity physical exercise as needed to get that valuation phase to a point where those behaviors can be controlled.
Yeah. And then it even shows within the research by teaching your clients this stuff, um, that gives them a better sense of self-efficacy and autonomy within the reasons they do the things that they do, right? So by teaching them that, hey, aerobic exercise improves these states, it also improves your neuroplasticity, your neurogenesis. It also improves your desire to lean into more challenging situations. So then they start to shift their perception of, I am a person that can handle this because I'm doing the work responsible to handle it, right? So they start to build, it goes hand in hand with education along with doing it. They start to build this perception of, I now have the self autonomy to create these perceptions, this valuation, and now I know how to act because I'm doing the things that are necessary to do that. Just like if we teach somebody cognitive behavioral therapy techniques of using, say, cognitive reappraisal, right? So we have a negative emotion that comes about, say, I don't want to go train today because I don't really feel that great. I didn't get the best sleep, right? So I'm not going to perform that well. If we can reappraise that too, I didn't put in my best effort to get the best sleep that I could, but this will be a good day to challenge myself to go to the gym and see what I can do when I'm not at 100%. And if I perform poorly, then that's going to motivate me to be more at 100%, right? So that perception shift of a negative emotion to a positive one is the same thing that we're doing with exercise. It goes hand in hand with strengthening those things.
I've always been a big believer in the use of cognitive behavioral strategies, especially with the nutrition side of things,
Yeah.
because I think nutrition is just such a wonderful window into people's psychology. You take away someone's food, you'll really see how fucked up they are.
Food and
Uh,
money. Yeah.
food and money, yeah. So it does your coaching practice use a lot more CBT and motivational interviewing, because I see that leading into what you said at the beginning of our conversation, in that the the client or the individual has to come to these conclusions on their own.
hmm
You can't just tell it to them.
Yeah.
So
So it's
yeah,
very subtle. It's
yeah.
very
How do you
subtle in
navigate that?
nature. Yeah. So I'll tell them a lot about the research behind the things that we're doing. And then I'll tell them, a variety of tools that they could use that's backed by research, and then I kind of let them pick the best one that they feel suits them at that point in time. One, because I'm not a practiced clinical psychologist yet, so I don't want to overstep my boundaries in giving them uh, too many like tools that are prescriptive in nature. So I want them to be able to come to those things themselves. And I mean, when you look at the research, right, with with emotion regulation, you have 5 different modalities of different types of cognitive regulation. The ones that seem to be the most successful is the reappraisal portion of it. That seems to be the one that has the most efficacy, that has the biggest effect sizes in terms of being able to regulate one's emotions. But it's not always the best thing that serves the situation, right? Sometimes there's this idea of trying to get rid of the negative stimulus, right? To avoid it altogether, right? This avoidance behavior, which some people think of as a bad thing, right? But when you look at it in terms of like, hey, if I walk down this street, every time I walk down the street, this dog tries to bite me. So instead of reframing that as like, oh, this is an opportunity to improve my sprint capacity, right? You just
My
avoid that
bite
street.
tolerance.
Yeah, you just avoid that street, right? So you give them the tools of distraction, suppression, avoidance, and reappraisal, and you tell them under certain situations these might be more effective than others. But then obviously in other situations they can be very maladaptive as well. And making sure that they understand those concepts can be very important to which ones they pick at that given moment in time.
I've seen it time and time again where that opportunity for the client to make the choice allows them a phenomenal amount of confidence in the approach that you're using because
Mm-hmm.
they're ultimately the ones who made that decision. I was working with a client recently. Actually, she dealt with like 35 plus years of disordered eating behaviors, and she's having a ton of trouble tracking her nutrition. So one of the questions was, okay, here are options. We can track calories, we can track protein, we can look at portion sizes, and I can give you how to measure your portion sizes without using a scale. Or you can just take pictures of your food and tell me how you felt after you ate them. And she was like, "Oh, I could take pictures of my food. I think that'd be really easy, and it'll force me to sit down to eat my meals. Cool, I'm going to do that." And she's been doing it every single day since. She feels fantastic about the experience. She's learning about why she's making the food choices that she's making. And of course, we put some guardrails in there to work on eating behaviors like, hey, we're not going to snack. We're going to choose whole meals. We're going to listen to our hunger cues and all those things. And now all of a sudden, she looks at nutrition as a massive benefit to her life as opposed to something that was previously stressing her. Now, can I further grade that exposure by, okay, how now you're sitting down to eat your meals? Maybe now we put your protein sources on a scale before you eat them, or you keep a tally of it in your phone, or however we go about it. But you can, if you pull it back as far as is needed to provide that self efficacy, now you've built a foundation that you can expand upon to ultimately get more controlled. I will say some people also don't need more control. And
Right.
maybe this is all she needed to get to where she wants to be. She's a 53-year-old woman who has no desire to compete. She just wants to learn how to eat without being stressed about it. Well, if this allows her to do that, well, sweet. We had a 20-minute conversation that ended up solving 35 years of problems.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it comes down to like giving them as many tools to choose from that best fit their current psychological state, their goals, that generative process, right? Because that's where emotions lie, is the idea of goal and striving towards something. Right. When it comes to emotions and being able to express them, I think due to the nature of like social media and texting and the fact that we don't really read books too much as human beings has really shrunk our, which is why I have all the books behind me,
I know. I was going to make a joke. Beat me to it.
and I think that has shrunk our vocabulary on emotional expression, right? So One of my classes, we were talking, it was a cognitive processes class, and we were talking about emotion and the ability to use certain language to express how we feel. And one of the guys gave an example of like he stubbed his toe on a printer, right? And immediately he was like, yeah, I was just angry. But then he's like, but I really wasn't angry. But that was the only expression, that was the only emotional vocabulary I had at the time to express how I felt. Right. And in that situation, it's not that big of a deal because it's just him and the printer. But in a relationship, right, you have a person that you're talking to, right? So the better you can express how you're truly feeling, the better they're going to understand you, the better they're going to see where you're coming from. But the only way to do that is to develop your vocabulary, to build more tools in your toolbox, right? So you give this example of this lady, like, hey, this is where we're at, this is what we could potentially go to. So she sees like future of like what we could do if we're not getting the goals that we want. So it's like, hey, if this doesn't work for me, I know that there's still more steps I can take, right? So now they have tools to build off of, to not only um, satisfy present self, but also know that future self has options just in case present self isn't satisfied, right? So I think that's an important strategy to have as a coach, is like to be able to lay out everything that you have to give them the best option that suits that person, as opposed to you saying, well, this is the best option because research shows this is the best option, so this is what we're going to do, and you'll just adapt to it no matter what, right? We see that in sports all the time, where coaches in American football, they have a certain style of offense, and then they draft a quarterback and they try to make that quarterback fit that offense, and it's a complete disaster. Then the quarterback goes to a different place where the offensive coordinator is like, what are you the best at? I'll adapt my system to fit you, and then it becomes a success, right? As a coach, we need to have our systems adapt to our athletes, as opposed to our athletes adapting to our system. As a coach, we shouldn't have systems. We should have a framework of what works and what doesn't work. But within that framework, we have each individual person to account for. And then we just build that autonomy for that person to know that, hey, like I am getting individual stuff within this paradigm and they're suiting it for me. One that shows them that, hey, the coach is listening, the coach cares about me. So then you have better buy-in. It shows that the coach has flexibility within the way that they structure things, right? Because if you have a coach that's too rigid, then as an athlete, you're going to create a rigid personality too, as well. So then it becomes very combative because you tend to give what you receive a lot of times. So if that coach is like, hey, this is the structure, and the athlete's like, all right, this is the structure. And then they reach out to you the next week. It's like, hey, I did everything you set out to me to do, and my shoulder hurts. And you're like, as a coach, like, well, why does your shoulder hurt? It's like, well, because I did these exercises and it started to hurt. And you're like, well, why did you do those exercises? Well, because the 3 months we've been working together, you told me that these are the exercises I have to do and that there's not a lot of variations to them. So as an athlete, I'm being as rigid as you're being. So therefore, I'm not going to have the autonomy to be like, wow, this hurts, I'm going to quit doing it and tell my coach later.
Talk to me a little bit about how like the psychology of relationships can impact that coaching experience for somebody, because it sounds to me, I mean, very blatantly, that the better a coach is able to form a relationship with the client, I say the better they're able to form that relationship with the client. I know how I do it, but is there research to back up maybe some best practices in relationship building when it comes to what the evidence in this field of psychology says?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you want to be a listener more than a talker, right? That's how you build up relationships. You want that person wants to be heard more than anything. Um, as a person who has done in-person coaching and personal training, uh, you learn quickly that the people that you work with live in a life where not a lot of people pay attention to what they're saying. So they come to you and they talk to you about so many different things because no one actually listens to them. And for the first time in their life, for a lot of people, you're listening to them and you're hearing them. And that's just rare for a lot of people, right? So listening and understanding and showing them that you're putting in the effort to get to where they want to go, with very good interpersonal communication, not like cookie cutter. communication, which we see a lot of times, that starts to build that relationship more and more. And then also just getting to know the person, asking them about life outside of the gym. What makes them happy? How's their relationship with their intimate significant other, with their family, like that type of stuff. Show that you care. Those are the things that build those relationships, right? Even things that you may not think that are inside the realm of coaching, like, hey, do you go to church on Sunday? What religion are you? Oh, that's interesting. Tell me about that. You know, we know that different cultures have different ways of expressing emotion, right? So we know that in America, if we're in a relationship with somebody that suppresses their emotions, then that has a negative impact on our nervous system, and we start to suppress our emotions, right? But in China and other Asian cultures, suppression is actually a valued structure within their paradigm, right? So if you suppress your emotions, they see that as a positive thing, and that doesn't have the same negative effect on their central nervous system, which we see in America, right? In America, we see that you have increase in blood pressure, increase in heart rate. In Chinese cultures, they don't have those same effects, right? So getting better understandings of who they are culturally, who they are with their friends, who they are with their family. Like those are the ways to build relationships inside and outside of coaching.
Yeah, one of the things that I find super beneficial, especially when it comes to like client retention, is when they see that you've taken an interest in them outside of just the coaching relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So like learning about, hey, what's the client's partner's name? When's their
Yep.
birthday? Do they have pets? Right? Do they have kids? What are their kids' names? Um, where are they located? I mean, the number of people who I've heard of coach clients that they don't even know where the client is in the world, especially in the online space. Everything that we do as online coaches should serve to bridge the gap of proximity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when you're coaching someone in person, you are there in person, your feet are on the floor right beside theirs. But can you recreate that same sensation within the person that you're speaking to, even if they're on the other side of the world? And it could be as simple as modifying your office hours so that you're responding to their messages at the same time that they're awake.
Yeah.
You see this, like, I have a client in Australia. I make sure that I answer her questions at 5 a.m. when I wake up. Even though I don't love being on my phone first thing in the morning, I know that for her at 5 a.m., she's awake, and she can answer my questions if I have any, and we can have a dialogue before she goes to bed. And that's important to her. Same thing, before I go to bed and she's waking up, I make sure that I go back in and answer any questions, or provide feedback wherever I can. Is it the best for me? No, but it's the best for her. In a similar situation, I choose my communication mediums very carefully based on who I'm dealing with. So if I have somebody that is dealing with a challenging time in their life, I will bias more video communication. If I have a client who is very busy, I might bias more text communication so that they can read it on their own time. And this comes down to, again, understanding the person and their needs in that moment, and being able to switch from one modality to the other based on how that person is at that point in their life, or at that point within our intervention. Um, and I think that only happens when you start to understand those deeper levels of who it is that you're dealing with. And it's pretty cool that the research supports that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're 100% right. It's like anything you can do to show that like you care is going to be effective strategy. If you see them on Instagram, they post a story about a book, and you go and read that book, and you can talk to them about that book, right? Because people post stuff that are interesting to them. So like just those little gestures of like, I see you, I value you, and I'm going to put forth the effort, means a lot to people. And it's not that difficult to do as a human being. Plus, you get positive out of it as well, right? Your nervous system responds adaptively. You become a happier person. So yeah, you may not enjoy waking up first thing in the morning and getting on your phone, but the fact that you're able to answer her questions in a timely manner makes you feel like you're a good coach, and therefore you're starting your day off with a victory, with a win, right? So it may not be the most ideal thing to do, but because it is in a positive nature and a generative drive towards your goal of being a good coach, you're still going to get a positive outcome of that because you're serving your client. And to you, that's an important thing to do, right? So that
Absolutely.
value system is in line with your actions. And every time you have your actions in line with your value system, you're a happier, more fulfilled person.
Amen to that. We've talked a little bit about social media more so in a negative light. I want to know, is there a way we can steel man an argument for social media having a positive effect on someone's psychology as we as coaches use it? So, for example, the types of content that we're posting or the way in which we present ourselves. Is there an aspect of research we can point to say, hey, this will actually make our potential clients more attracted to us or our existing clients more likely to stick with us for the long term? Like, is there anything we could steel man about social media to say, hey, this could be a good thing when used appropriately?
Well, it depends on how you define a good thing when used appropriately, right? So in order to grow your business, social media can be a very advantageous venture. Um, but that's due to like testimonials, that's due to understanding the psychology of like what people want. So, it's like when you go to a grocery store and they have the food that is the most palatable, the most like dopamine driven right at the checkout. Sure, it's like,
Those
ex-
tasty cakes. Those
yeah,
tasty cakes will get you.
it's extremely manipulative to do that, but is that is that their problem, right? So sure, you can present yourself as like the best coach in the world and be the worst human being on the planet, but you're going to grow your business. um, so I think in terms of from a personal perspective, you can use social media as a way to create the world that you want to live in, which can be a positive thing that aligns with your values. And your intention is to maybe put out information that can be very helpful to people. If that's your goal and everything that you do is in line with that, then I think that's a great way to have a positive outlook on social media. Do a lot of people use it in that aspect? I don't necessarily think so. Um, I think the negatives with social media far outweigh the positives in terms of what you can get out of it and what it does to the human psyche. Um, because when you look at it and you talk to some of the Paul Conti's a really big psychologist, and he has this idea that um, evil is manifested through envy, and envy is the most egregious um, emotion that someone can have, uh, because envy is what facilitates the desire to create resentment, to do evil things. Adolf Hitler had a lot of envy towards Jews, towards people that got into art college, towards all this stuff, and he created a lot of resentment. And then he found a way to capitalize on that and create his government structure that was responsible for the largest genocide, one of the largest genocides in human nature, right? I think social media, due to the algorithms, due to the companies that built the algorithms to be the most financially beneficial, creates a lot of envy in people. It creates a lot of want for things that they don't have. It creates a society that's not real. Because even when people are real on social media, it's fake, right? The fact that somebody can set up their phone and create tears to show that they're being real is
Yeah.
so the opposite of that, right? So I think you can use social media to be a benefit, but I think in order for you to get the most out of life, getting off of social media and value in social interaction and communication is going to be the most beneficial. So as a coach, I would recommend using social media to put out positive content that can create value for people and help them, but then shift that towards a smaller private community where people feel safe, where they don't feel like they're being compared, where you feel like you can give more value and content to them, and create a community environment where everyone feels like they're thriving and supporting each other. So I think that could be a real beneficial way of doing it, is to build that community, to create a smaller, more niche community of people that don't feel the pressures of social media. But yeah, I think intent's the most important thing when it comes to that.
That was kind of the answer that I was looking for because, I think people might listen to us badmouth social media and think that we're advocating for you to just check out. And ultimately, there are some people that can, right? There are some people that if they checked out of social media, their business could thrive and they could continue to do amazing things. But they've also spent the majority of their time on social media, building their email lists, getting their network set up so that they can have a constant stream of referrals. If you're going to exist in the online space, in my opinion, you will have to be present on social media, especially if your
Mm-hmm.
goal is to expand your audience. But I would pose the question to you of, is the goal to expand the audience of people, or is the goal to expand the audience of people who resonate with you, your message, and your values? And that's going to be a completely different outcome in terms of what you put out onto social media. When we boil it down to like marketing strategies, people need to know you, like you, and trust you in order to purchase from you. They also need to have a high degree of confidence that you can help them achieve their goals. You can do that without being a complete asshat liar, right? You're just not going to be someone who has tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers unless you're one of the best in the world at something.
Yeah.
And that's okay because ultimately your business is going to grow based on who you are and the values that you hold. And these people that have massive followings and have coaching businesses, the reason that they have the need to constantly acquire clients is because they're constantly churning clients as well with bad service. That's we talk about it all the time in my group mentorship of like how you are a representation of your brand and you are also a representation of the people that you bring in. And if you're constantly bringing in good quality people that hold the same values as you, they're going to stay with you for a really long time. And so if you're only onboarding one client a month or one client every other month, but you only lose one client a year, your roster is going to grow and your
Yeah.
business is going to grow and you're going to be successful because that high level of service is going to mandate that you can charge a more premium price. Your long-term customer value goes up and it just is a feed forward mechanism for growth. And I love that you talked about the community aspect because I think that social media can be used to create some pretty fantastic and nurturing communities. I just don't think that they exist on the main platforms.
Yeah. And you have to ask yourself too, as an individual, like, is this platform best suited for me and my values in life, right? So the idea that everyone wants to have an online business is great because it does give you a lot of freedom and autonomy to move about. But if the fact that every time you go to post something on social media, you're frustrated with the outcome, right? And then you just say, oh, like, I'm not getting views because I don't show X, Y, or Z, and this person does because they do that. And every time I open it, I'm frustrated. Why aren't I getting more likes? Why aren't I getting more views? Why isn't my stuff growing? Or the people that are like, I had to take a month off of social media because it was bad for my health, but now I'm back on here and I feel great again. And it's like, those are definitely key signs of like, maybe this is not the best avenue of business for you. Maybe this is not the best platform for you to create your own business, right? You want to do things that serve your values, serve who you are, and create joy in your life. So if you're constantly frustrated with something, not to say that starting a business is not going to be hard work and that you're going to enjoy every aspect of it, but it's very easy to ask yourself, hey, every time I get on here, do I feel better about myself when I get off, or do I feel worse about myself when I get off? And if the answer is constantly I feel worse, then maybe that's telling you something, and you just have to be open to hearing that.
Well, I mean, that feeds perfectly into why you're starting a podcast. You made that appraisal for yourself. Like, hey, when I record podcasts, I feel freaking great. But when I go on social media to make a post, I just feel like I'm throwing mud at a wall.
Yeah.
It's like,
Essentially, yeah, yeah. You got to do what you enjoy doing, because it is difficult. It is difficult to grow a business. It's difficult to get a degree. It's difficult to pursue anything in life. So you want to make sure that it's enjoyable first and foremost. It's something that you love to do. And I think if you follow that aspect of things, then it's easier to overcome the things um, that aren't as pleasurable within growing a business or growing yourself. You lean into the challenges more, but it has to be in a pursuit of doing something that you absolutely love to do. And that's really up to you to decide. But yeah, I think if you're constantly frustrated, not only is that going to perpetuate into your business, but it's also going to perpetuate into your life. You're going to be frustrated with the people that are closest to you, you know, and I think that all creates a negative aspect into your day-to-day interactions. And you just want to make sure that the things that you're doing to grow a business doesn't interfere with the things that matter to you the most, which is your friendships, your relationships, and that type of stuff.
I love it, man. Plug your podcast. Where can people find your podcast?
Yeah, so still recording episodes. It'll be out in January, but it is on iTunes. It'll be on Spotify as soon as I can figure out how to get my RSS feed on Spotify. It's very tricky. They make it not as easy as you would think. But yeah, it's just the Tony Montgomery podcast, and it'll be out, and hopefully it'll be something that you guys enjoy listening to.
I love how you showcased your creativity in the title.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I went to AI and I was like, what's a good title for my podcast? And it said a bunch of stuff, and I just didn't agree with it. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to name it after me, because I'm a narcissist at heart and I want it to be all about me.
Self awareness, kids. Self
Yeah,
awareness.
yeah. Well, no, I mean, in all honesty, the title is really because it doesn't pigeonhole you into any one direction. So you're able to explore as much as you want. Um, and yeah, I just don't really, creativity is not my forte, so it is what it is.
Well, I'm sure you'll do some research into why that is and you'll come out of it. Dude, I really appreciate you joining me again. I always appreciate our conversations and I always appreciate your points of view. And not only in, making evidence-based decisions, but also now looking at those evidence-based decisions as they relate to the person that you're working with. And I think that there was a tremendous amount of value for the audience in this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Anytime we talk, it's a real pleasure and a good experience of just personal growth and development.
I love it, man. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.